The Ukrainian capital had yet another high-profile visitor, a visit that many did not expect in their wildest dreams. Yes, US President Joe Biden visited the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, pledging his unwavering support to Ukraine, a visit that is both significant and symbolic. An American president visiting a country that is at war is almost unheard of. More importantly, it sends a clear message to Russia, making it clear that it's not Ukraine alone that Russia is facing. Standing firmly behind it is the United States. In fact, with this gesture, it almost seems as if US is now standing shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine in the forefront of war. That is what, from the optics, is the message that the world is seeing. Biden announced an additional $500 million in US assistance, including shells for howitzers, anti-tank missiles, air surveillance radars, and other aid. Let's listen in to what the POTUS had to say.
The world was literally at the time bracing for the fall of Kyiv. Seems like a lot longer ago than a year, but think back to that year. Perhaps even the end of Ukraine. You know, 1 year later, Kyiv stands, and Ukraine stands. Democracy stands. The Americans stand with you, and the world stands with you. Kyiv has captured a part of my heart, I must say.
The visit was kept secret due to obvious security reasons, but the roads in Kyiv were shut down today, fueling speculations. And reports suggest that Biden reached Kyiv via a train from Poland. February 24th marks a year of the Ukraine war, with no end in sight for now for either sides. Now, welcoming the visit, President Zelensky said that the criminal war must end with the liberation of Ukraine from all Russian occupation, and democratic nations must come together for it. Let's listen in.
Переговори з паном президентом Сполучених Штатів Америки в форматі тет-а-тет, а потім в розширеному форматі. Це була розмова, яка дійсно наближає нашу спільну перемогу в цій війні. Ми можемо і маємо зробити так, щоб саме цей рік, 23-й, став роком перемоги. І я хочу підкреслити, ця неспровокована і злочинна російська війна проти України, всієї Європи та демократичного світу має завершитись очищенням всієї української землі від окупації Росії та твердими гарантіями довготривалої безпеки як нашої держави, так і усієї Європи і всього світу.
Well, joining me here on the program this evening is Meera Shankar, former ambassador of India to the United States. Very good evening, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us here on Nation Tonight. You know, this is a very interesting situation, and I want to begin right away by asking you that what did you read into the statements made by US President Joe Biden? It's not unknown to the world that Ukraine has US support, but to step into the war zone in person, express support to Ukraine in this form and manner, how does this serve US, ma'am?
Well, look, I think Biden is signaling to Putin that the US support for Ukraine is not wavering, and that they are there for the long haul. They will stand by Ukraine. He has expressed support for Ukrainian democracy, for Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, offered more assistance, including more lethal weapons, and additional sanctions against Russia. Now, this comes on the eve of the anniversary of the Russian invasion into Ukraine, and also at a time when Russian forces in eastern Ukraine have broken through two levels or two lines of Ukrainian defenses after months of not being able to move forward, or setbacks where Ukraine was able to recapture territory captured by Russia. So in some sense, this is a kind of advance for the Russians. Mm-hmm. The Ukrainians expect an offensive by Russia, and they have been complaining that they are short of ammunition and that European production lines are too stretched to meet their requirements, and therefore the urgent visit by Zelensky to the US, where they were offered, more assistance and weapons.
Yes.
And now, of course, the US will be supplying tanks, so will Germany. So are they trying to persuade other countries? So will UK, though they have said no to jet fighters for Ukraine. On the other hand, you have Russia,
Yes.
which has recruited additional soldiers through their mobilization, trained them, has brought in, some of their mercenaries, and are ready to launch an offensive in Ukraine. So you have a situation where the conflict seems poised to aggravate rather than any steps forward to resolve the conflict.
It's interesting you say that, Meera Shankar, because, if you recall, December 25th, 2022, and I'll put out that quote for our viewers also to see, where Putin, while speaking to a Russian broadcaster, said, "We are ready to negotiate with everyone involved about acceptable solutions, but it is up to them. We are not the ones refusing to negotiate." It seemed like a peace overture coming from Putin. But like you said, things have aggravated from there on. Now, what I want to also ask you here, ma'am, is that, was this a message, to Russia alone or to the world at large? Is there a larger point that President Biden is making beyond expressing support to Ukraine?
Well, firstly, let me say that Russia and Ukraine at the beginning of the conflict had engaged in discussions brokered by Turkey, and they had almost initialed an MOU on the principles that should govern the resolution of the conflict, including that Ukraine will not join NATO, an assurance that Ukraine will not join NATO. But then there was that unscheduled visit by British Prime Minister Boris Johnson,
Yes.
where essentially this peace deal was scuttled. So in the West, I think there is this sense, for the US, they've achieved a number of their objectives because they are not fighting directly. It's the Ukrainians who are paying the price in terms of destruction of cities, infrastructure, exit of millions of refugees from the country. And at the same time, the US has been able to mobilize NATO, consolidate its leadership over NATO, which Trump had, in a sense, squandered, and sever the energy links between Russia and Europe, because one of the big concerns that the US had was the coming on stream of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which would have almost doubled Russian energy supplies to Germany. Now, of course, that's on hold, and Europe is looking at cutting back on supplies of energy from Russia and looking to alternative sources. So if you take a look at US objectives, they have achieved several of their objectives already. That is, consolidating leadership over NATO, severing Europe's energy links, and their objective seems to be to weaken Russia and make it bleed, maybe bringing about a change in Putin's leadership in Russia. But so far, the Russian economy has held out. And in fact, the European economies have also been facing problems as a result of this transition away from the energy link with Russia. And that's impacting their economies as well. So it's a difficult situation, especially for the world, which
and that is what I wanted to come to, Ambassador Meera Shankar, because, you mentioned before this Boris Johnson, there was French President Emmanuel Macron, there's German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak as well, who visited Ukraine, and and therefore this just follows a series of those high-profile visits. Where does India stand in all of this? Because if there is to be a grouping now of this sort, where you see US firmly backing Ukraine, China is more gravitating towards Russia or expressing support towards Russia, then where does India stand? President Zelensky today says democratic nations must stand together. Does this put India in a bit of a spot?
I think India has made its position quite clear. It does not hold with the violation of the UN Charter, which does not permit the invasion of another country's territory by a country. Having said that, India also recognizes that the problem is complex and lies in the structures which were built after the collapse of the Soviet Union with the expansion of NATO. So Russia believes that what NATO has been doing in Ukraine presents an existential threat to Russia. So does Ukraine believe that the Russian invasion is an existential threat to Ukraine. And of course, Europe and the US say that it's an existential threat to democracies. So they need to stand together. But India's view is that the conflict is tragic. And instead of actually aggravating the conflict, intensifying it, what is needed today is for saner voices to prevail, to find acceptance for the proposition that the conflict should be wound down, maybe a ceasefire negotiated, and in the meanwhile, talk started on what could be a solution which both sides could accept, because neither, Ukraine is going to be able to achieve its ultimate aim, which is to drive Russia out of all Ukrainian territory, nor is Russia likely to be able to achieve its aims. In fact, its march towards Kyiv in the beginning was thwarted. It is still struggling to actually obtain victory in the pockets of territory in the eastern areas, which it has claimed as its territory and merged with Russia. So I think that neither side is going to be able to achieve their maximum aims, and will have to settle for some kind of talks and a consensus, even if partial.
That is what I believe diplomats like you would be doing, and perhaps, like you said, I would end with the the sentiment that you expressed about how saner voices must prevail. Can India be that sane voice at this point? Can it remain equidistant from both sides, and at the same time, in some way, get involved in negotiating, like you put it, wind down the conflict and negotiate for an amicable solution, a consensus, as it were? Thank you so much, Ambassador Meera Shankar, for joining us here this evening.
Thank you.
Well, with that, let's now talk about other news coming in at this point and updating you here on the Prithvi Shaw's selfie brawl. Accused Sapna Gill and 3 others were granted bail